Last week, I shared the analogy of climbing a mountain, of going up a hike, and you get to what you think is the top, and it's only the next. It's just like a hip of the mountain, and you just keep going and going and going, and this repeats. And you think you're there, but there is just really the next step. And I related this to our work life, trying to be successful in life, of getting out of college and realizing, wait, there's more there. And then you get a good job, and you have to put in time there. Then you have to get more certifications, and there's always just this next level. And your faces really told the story. You're looking at me the whole time, but I get to look at you the whole time. And some of your faces were very knowing. In the sense that you have enough life experience to have realized, hey, that next requirement that my work is giving me is just the next in perhaps an endless set of requirements that I'm going to have to keep going and achieving. Your faces were also humorously pained. I think some of you have been on hikes that were a little longer than you were told. This final sermon on work. Series are kind of a bittersweet moment for me because it's always fun to kind of conclude something and think about the next thing. And I was headed into last sermon, decided to split this one into two sermons. So last week we were talking about rest, and this week we're talking about retirement. And my wife said, I hope it goes well for you. So it's not going to be that kind of sermon on retirement. But you might be wondering, what on earth does a sermon on retirement or even rest have to do in a series on work? And I think what we think about retirement reflects what do we think about work. That's an important thing for us to think about. Like, when we have our job and we're putting in the time, what is our end goal? What is that thing that we are working towards? How we think about retirement reflects how do we think about creation? It reflects how do we think about heaven. So I would say it's a very important topic for us to talk about that I don't think the church really talks about enough. I've definitely studied way more about retirement than I ever thought I would at this point in my life. But most of what I've read is that retirement kind of comes in three phases. There's the retirement honeymoon phase, or some people call this the sugar rush phase. It's the joy or the fun of sleeping in. Golfing in the middle of the afternoon, or day drinking if that's your thing, of not commuting to work. It's the fun of walking around in your pajamas. It's sort of the excitement. It's like a Christmas morning type excitement of, it's here. I've talked with some of you, and you can tell me to the day how long it's going to be until you retire. And so that you're looking forward to this, but they describe this as a sugar rush, where it's this brief moment that after the first couple of weeks or even months, if it lasts that long, there's kind of a sugar crash, or what they call disillusionment. So you could ask the question, like, when your life is a vacation, how do you vacation? Or you could ask the reverse question, if your life is a vacation, how do you find meaning again? People who hit this phase, they're asking questions like, will my money last? Will my health hold up? Is this all that there is? They go through a loss of a social network, a loss of identity. Most people find their identity in their work and in their job. Visit another country, and you ask people, what do they do, or who are they, or where are they from? And they will always talk about their family, their children, their parents, their brothers, their sisters, their village and their tribe. They don't talk about their place of work, their organization, their job title, their education. But in the West, you come to a conference here, ask people, hey, tell me about yourself. Oh, I work for this company. I went to this school. I have this kind of position. And then family is kind of second. Like our identity and our significance kind of comes from our work. For many people, even their social life comes from work. And now that retirement is there, this is gone. The rates of depression among retirees is at 28%. This is significantly higher than general rates of depression amongst the general adult population. Divorce rates of those in retirement age have doubled what they used to be. Sexually transmitted diseases have increased in the same age bracket, depending on what kind of disease you're talking about or what place. Some are seeing an increase as much as 200% within a 7-year window. Don't go read the studies. They're you'll find out more than you want to know. But there are real studies dedicated to asking and answering these questions, because this is a real problem for people as they are getting older. All of this disillusionment has left 1 in 6 retirees with this desire to return to the workforce just to kind of sort out the meaning of their life. And then the final phase is adjustment. A lot of the self-help advice on this topic says things like embrace the change, adjust your attitude, accept what you can't change, redefine your identity, set goals, develop hobbies, join a peer support group, get a pet, eat healthy, get a good night's rest. Now, I'm not saying any of that advice is bad or wrong. If you're not eating healthy or getting a good night's rest, that's probably great no matter what life phase you're in. But are you telling me that we're working our whole lives so that at the end of our life, the best advice people are giving us is get a pet? I mean, think about that for a moment. Is that, sometimes we can't see around the next bend, and we're so focused on putting in the hours that we don't ever think to look far enough down the road to go, what are people in that life phase dealing? What are the questions that keep them up at night? And apparently, according to many, many studies I've read this week, it's what kind of pet should I have? Again, nothing wrong with pets. You want pets? Get pets. But is that the purpose and meaning of life? Is that all that there is? This sermon's a little bit different because on the one hand, if you go, well, what does the Bible say about retirement? Kind of nothing, which can lead people to say, well, let's just take this anti-approach. Well, it's unbiblical to retire, and that's not my approach this morning. I kind of want to look at some of these issues and factors that people are feeling in this phase and try to put a little bit of theological context to that. And some of this is going to be by giving us some high-level theology to think about. So the first point this morning is this is the end of work. Now, when we say end, we typically mean like it now stops. But in Greek, there's a word for end, which is telos, and telos has a number of meanings. And one of those is it relates to purpose. This is the purpose of work, the end goal of work. So we could take that point and ask it as a question, what is the end goal of work? What is God's purpose for work? And I would say to understand God's purpose for work, we have to understand its beginnings. This is why sermon 1 and 2 is to talk about what was God's original design for work in the garden before sin had ever impacted anything. What was his purpose? He gave Adam and Eve work to do. He put his image on them. God is a creative God. We see all of these as part of his nature. It's important at this moment to remind ourselves of the definition that we've been using this whole time, which is work is the way in which we are useful to others. It's the way in which we bring God's blessing to others. It's not our job. It's not our paycheck. Work is our usefulness, according to one definition, or mine, is how do we bless other people? That is our work. And so we could ask the question, well, what was work in the garden? There were no jobs. There were no companies. Okay, we see what his work was. The fall happened, work has been skewed. Now we're talking about the future, the end, for younger people, the end of our working careers, for others, those who are in that moment. So let's ask another question. Will there be work in heaven? I don't want to answer that one too quickly. I want you to kind of stew on that for a second. Do you think there's going to be work in heaven? I feel like sort of pop theology would tell us, one, heaven is like this cloudly place where we sit as little cherubs with harps on clouds. And to the degree where a lot of people go, sit around and do nothing, that's not my idea of heaven. But she just said that sounds like hell. For those of us who are active people, absolutely, yeah. I don't, why? What is that? So this kind of comes to the question also of what is heaven? When we ask the question, is there work in heaven? So I want us to read from Revelation chapter 21. John is going to talk about the new heaven and the new earth, which is not typically how we conceptualize of heaven. We think of heaven as, again, this sort of place that's out there. And thus, everything will be taken care of. There will be no work. There will be no needs. There will be no anything. And some of that is true, but I'm going to question a little bit of it. In Revelation 21, starting in verse 22, he's just given a really big description of the kinds of foundations that this city is going to have and the walls and the gates, and it's going to be very symmetrical, would be just a summary of the whole previous chapter. It's going to be very, very symmetrical and very beautiful. Starting in verse 22, it says, "And I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light the nations will walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it, and its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruits, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And night will be no more, and there will be no need for light. There will be no light or lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and he will reign forever and ever. Now, it's easy to look past much of what is said and just kind of think of this as some sort of futuristic hyper speech, that he's being poetic and it's all just kind of, word pictures and illustrations and similes and that kind of thing. Even it might sound at first kind of what we imagine heaven to be, this sort of fantasy fiction type place that doesn't really correspond much to our own world. But then we start seeing terms that look very common, things like nations. The nations are going to be gathered in what sounds like some kind of procession as they bring glory and honor to the king. But there's a few hints that there's going to be work here in this passage. Number one, it's a city. Cities have certain functions that they perform. Number two, there's going to be healing that takes place there. There's this tree of life that's growing, and its leaves are what? It's for the healing of the nations. Well, healing is work. Any medical professionals in here? Your job is work, right? There's a wall. I never thought about this. What's on the other side of a wall? There's something else on the other side. That's why there's the wall. It divides this from that. There's inside and there's outside. There's a city and there's a wall around the city, and then there's something on the other side in the new heavens and new earth, which is our final destination, by the way. That's what he's saying here. There is a wall and there's something on the other side of the wall. Moreover, there's a river. This is not just a river on a cycle. This river goes somewhere. Where does the river go? What's on the other side of the wall? Where does the river go? There are these hints that it's more than just sitting around on a cloud. There's hints that it's more than just one eternity-long worship service. It seems like what the Bible has been teaching, that all of our life is intended to be acts of worship towards God. 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. There's a little bit of a hint here that whatever is coming, there's going to be more than simply sitting around singing all day long. Now, maybe you're sitting there going, okay, Brian, that's a bit of a stretch. You're reading too much into the fact that there's a wall and there's a river. Maybe it is metaphor. Maybe it is just a word picture. Okay, I'll accept that. I want to show you another passage. This is Isaiah 65. In verse 17, and again, Isaiah is talking about the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and the new earth. He says, in verse 17, says, "For behold, I create new heavens and new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind." In verse 21, there's more description there, but I'll skip down to verse 21. It says, "They shall build houses and inhabit them." They shall build houses and inhabit them, okay. "They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall be the days of my people. And my chosen shall long enjoy the works of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord, and their descendants with them." What are the words you notice there? Building, planting, laboring. All of these things are part of the new kingdom. What has been removed then? They will labor, but they will not labor in vain. The problem with our work is sin. It is the marring that sin brought. It's the toil that sin brought. Adam and Eve were always supposed to be keepers of the garden. But after After the fall, that work became drudgery. It became toil. It was still the same process. God said, look, you're still going to work the ground, but it's by the sweat of your brow. It's by toil, basically till the end of your days. There will still be work, but it's going to lack the futility, the toil, and the drudgery that we so often associate with it. I think that's when we sit back and analyze, what do I hate about work? That's the side of work that we kind of hate. If we look into the studies on retirees and what do they have to say, 1 in 6 are returning to work to find meaning and purpose and community and so many other things where you go, wait a second, meaning, purpose, community, all good things. What they don't want is the drudgery and the futility. This is the end of work. This is the purpose of work. It doesn't just evaporate and go away in heaven. We're brought into a new heaven and a new earth, and there's some kind of correspondence, the degree to which I don't know, but there's some kind of correspondence to the present heaven and the present earth. We're brought into a new heaven and a new earth. We're brought into a new city, and there's some kind of work for us to do. But it is the joy side of work. It is the purpose side of work, the meaning side of work. So the next point is, this is not the end of work. If there was work in the garden and there's work in heaven, then retirement is not the end of our work. Again, the definition of work is not your job, your paycheck, your position, your company, etc. It is your usefulness and your blessing to others, the ways in which you do those things. Our culture values youth, we value innovation, we value the things that are new and next, much more than we value words like traditional or mature. And yet we can look even to some human examples in our own world. J.R.R. Tolkien was 62 when he published Fellowship of the Ring. Ronald Reagan was 69 when he became president. Donald Trump, 70. Joe Biden, 78. Nelson Mandela was 75 when he became South Africa's first democratically elected president. Noah Webster was 70 when he published the dictionary. Miles Davis, jazz musician, was 65, still writing music and recording albums. Picasso made 347 engravings in a single year when he was 87. Mother Teresa received the Nobel Peace Prize at 69. This is not the end of work. Our association with there's work and then there's perpetual vacation through which we try to find some kind of meaning until we die. This is not actually even a historic idea throughout the world. There's a story in the Bible about Caleb. This is coming from Joshua chapter 14. And basically the children of Israel have gone into the land. They've kicked out sort of in the major cities. They've taken the major areas. And there's just the really problematic areas of the land that God has promised them that they've got to deal with. And Caleb gives this amazing speech to Joshua in Joshua 14, verse 6, he says, Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. And I brought him word again as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me were made the heart of the people melt. Yet I who wholly follow the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. So up to this point, he's described, they went to spy out the land, they went into the land, they came back and gave a report. Most of the spies basically said, hey, this is too big for us. It's too scary. You don't understand. And Joshua and Caleb alone basically said, no. God is on our side. He will fight the battles. Let's do this. And so because of this, those are the only two from that group that went into the land. Verse 10, it says, Now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since that time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now behold, I am this day 85 years old. I'm still as strong as today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and for coming. So now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you have heard on that day how the Anakim were the giants, how they were with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me and I shall drive them out just as the Lord has said. He's 85 years old giving this speech of, I want the hardest topography with the biggest cities and the biggest combatants. Let me at them. There's no sense of, you know what? I put in my time. This is a young man's game. Hey, young men, get out there. Make this happen. He says, no. I'm going to be on the front of this battle line. There was no quit in him. Some churches have gone into retirement mindset. There was a pastor in the area who shared with me that the retirees in his church have this mindset. We put in our time, we served, we've done our time. Now it's time for the next group. Now, if you hear me talk long enough, you'll hear me talk a lot about raising the next generation of leaders, of training and mentoring people, of giving people opportunities to lead, chances to fail, a recovery system in place to work with them. This is key to how I think, and part of it is that it is important for us to bring up the next generation of leaders. On the other hand, the idea that at the age when we're done with our paid work, we're also done with our Christian service, I don't think we find that as a biblical example, that I have punched the clock and now this belongs to someone else. There's work after work, and this is the work after work. I want to submit to you today that God's ultimate plan and purpose for your life is not this sugar rush of a perpetual vacation where you can shed the constraints of your job. Our culture tells us that this is the end purpose, the highest goal for all of our lives. But God's work for our life began before our first job, and it's going to continue until he calls us home. There's nothing in Christian theology that affirms this escapist mentality that our culture teaches about work. Paul actually had to address this head on in the church in Thessalonica. We all quote that verse, if any man will not work, neither shall he eat. But we quote that out of context. The context of that is this group had such an understanding that Jesus is coming back and it's any day. So since Jesus is coming back tomorrow, I'm not going to pay my bills and I'm not going to show up to work. I'm going to go sit out on a hillside and wait for him. Okay, that's a great strategy for a day or 2 or 3, but what happens after a week or 2 or a month? They're sitting out there waiting and not working, so now they're having to beg bread from people. And this is what Paul is saying is, look, Jesus is coming soon, but in the interim, if any man will not work, neither will he eat. There is a purpose to what we are doing right here, right now. We need to begin living with our purpose for our work right now, wherever the right now is for you. Because there's always the next phase of life. Whatever life phase you're in, there's always the next one that is coming. And if you can figure out what is God's purpose for my work, what is his purpose for my life? If you can figure that out and live it right now, as you go into whatever the next phase of life is, that sense of disillusionment, that loss of identity that comes with moving from one life phase to the next. This can be, young people, this can be from going from high school to college. These kinds of things happen where you lose your sense of identity of who you were, and you're now thrust into a new phase of life where you're trying to figure it all out again. In college days, that's part of the fun, but it gets less and less fun the later phases in life you go into that in. But if we can figure out what is God's purpose, if you could figure that out in high school, wow. What a gift to be able to walk into college and say, okay, my whole world has changed, but God's purpose and plan for my life has not. Caleb is not coming up with some new idea about his life. He's saying, do you remember 40 plus years ago when God said this? He remembered what was God's plan, what was his promise, what was his purpose, and now he's just saying, look, age is just a number. Let me at him. When we figure out that purpose, that is what guides us and actually creates a sense of comfort of going from one phase into the next. We need to begin now. Abraham and Sarah, they had their son of promise. They had when Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90. Moses was 80 when he led the Israelites out of Egypt. Anna, the prophetess, this is in Luke chapter 2, she was 84 years old when she prophesied over Jesus. Simeon, we're not told how old he was, but the text makes it clear he's old. He's in the same chapter, Luke 2, when he prophesies over Jesus. We see in the New Testament where Paul sets this standard of older women in the church are supposed to instruct the younger women in the church. 1 Timothy 5, 1-2, Paul is instructing, he says, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father, and younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters in all purity. There's this sense of family and identity, and unlike our culture, which says the older you get, the less relevant you become, in the Bible, it says the older you get, the more like a father and a mother to the rest of the whole family you become. It's a different order of things. There is work after our work, and this is it. God doesn't take people who move into retirement and just kind of push them out simply for the next generation. It is important that we train the next generation. These passages are in the book where Paul is talking to one of his young men that he is training. It's talking in the same book where he's saying, look, Timothy, take what I've taught you, generation one, I'm teaching you, teach it to faithful men who are able to teach others also, right? He's talking about 4 generations. But it's the same chapter where he says, look, when you're working with older people, they're your father and they're your mother. The work after our work relates to what I said about God's will a few weeks ago in the sermon on Joseph. If you weren't here for that day, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it. But I basically put a triangle up on the screen, and it looks kind of like a pyramid, where the bottom of the foundation is God's big picture, the big story of the Bible. This is God's will for your life. And so we go, okay, God, this is your will for my life. I'm obeying what I understand from the Bible. Okay, now what do I do? And then the next section of the triangle is the very top section of the triangle, and it's what is our job? Where do we work? Where do we live? Where does the paycheck come from? It's all those kinds of questions. And in the middle section of the triangle, I just had this big question mark. See, every time the top of the triangle changes, our world feels like it's changing. We have this sense of a loss of identity and purpose, a dislocation with where we live and the social networks we're part of. It has all of that effect. But if we understand the middle part of the triangle, this is who God really made us to be, his real purpose for our life. I overlaid that with the story of Joseph. Joseph is in his father's house, and then he goes from his father's house into Potiphar's house as a slave. And from there, he goes into prison as a prisoner. And from there, he goes into Pharaoh's house as the number 2 in Egypt. And in each and every place, while the top part of that triangle did changed quite dramatically, the bottom part of God's plan for his life was always for him to be over there in Egypt as the number 2, for him to preserve the line of Messiah, for him to save that region of the world from the famine that hit it. But the middle part of that triangle didn't change. Who was Joseph, really? He was hardworking. He was trustworthy, dependable. That's who he was. That's who he was in each and every place. As the top part of that triangle changed every few years, the middle part of that triangle is exactly who he was. So my encouragement to you then was, and to you now is, what is that middle part of the triangle for you? What is that thing that even if you were put in prison, you no longer had, your Sunday things that you were part of. You no longer had your Monday through Friday, your job. You no longer had your Saturday, your weekend, your hobbies. What is that thing that even if you were in prison, you would be doing for the kingdom, that you'd be doing for God? Who has God really made you to be? For Joseph, we see that in the story. God made him to be an administrator. God made him to be a trustworthy person, that they could put many things under him and he would deal with them responsibly. When we understand that middle part of the triangle, we can go from the phase of being in college to being in the workforce to being retired. And while there are a lot of things that still have to be sorted out, there's not the same sense of a loss of identity because we knew who we were in all 3 places. I want to close with a couple of questions for you. But first, I want to talk about next Sunday for a moment. Since this is the last Sunday, late last year we did what I called an epilogue Sunday. So we spent 28 weeks going through the book of 1 Corinthians, and I thought we've all committed a lot of brain space, a lot of our spiritual growth this year to this book and through this time. And so I took some time and space and provided here on a Sunday. I sat in a chair and had another chair and another microphone, and everyone got to come up and just share what had you been learning through the series? What did God really put on your heart? And so I want to do the same thing. I'm sharing this with you now to just give you a little bit of preparation for those who need the internal processors in the room. So we've had 2 series since we've done this. Number 1 was the Gospel at Work series. And so that was earlier this year. And then the second series has been this one, the Gospel at Work. Sorry, I said Gospel at Work twice, didn't I? Meals with Jesus. That's what was going on in my brain. Time change. Meals with Jesus and Gospel at Work. Promise I'm not crazy. So both of these, I feel like I've had such good interaction with many of you on the side, and in this series, I've brought a lot of you up on stage. So I just want to kind of put that out there of, I want us to have a moment together as we've gone through 2 very outward-facing series. What is God doing in your life with these series? What has he really brought home for you? One other thing I want to do during that time, and I haven't thought exactly through the nuts and bolts of this. We do this for teachers a lot of times at the beginning of a school year. We kind of bring them up and we pray for them, and we do sort of a light commissioning for them. And I think this is important. I believe what I said in Sermon 1, where I don't see a separation between the sacred and secular. I see it's God's world. He made it all. He wants it all back. And so the idea that if you are focused in your work, wherever that is, if you're focused on the work, on this idea that God has me here to reclaim this turf for him, I want to commission you in that. And so I just want to put that in your brain of, is this just been a fun series where you've thought about things maybe that you haven't been forced to think about? Or is this something where a fire has been ignited inside of you? You go, you know what? I am going to do this in my place of work. I'm going to see myself this way in my place of work. If that's you, next Sunday, we're going to have a time where I want to commission you to do that. Okay, final 2 questions to just think about retirement for you, whether you're in retirement or planning for retirement. Number 1 is, does my plan for retirement exclude work? When people move into retirement, they make big plans to travel and to do certain things, but does that exclude work for you? Does it exclude the idea of blessing others, of having a usefulness and purpose? Is it escapism? My life has been bad. I've had to do these things because that's just part of the bad side of life. You've got to make the money and save it up and discipline yourself so that at this point, we can now do this other thing. Are you simply escaping the life from which you've come? Question number 2, does my plan for retirement exclude God's purposes? Go home today and just Google things like retirement depression. It is staggering the number of articles from all sectors that are trying to help with this, trying to figure out how do we help retirees who have moved into that place of disillusionment and even depression. How do we help them out? And as a pastor, pastorally, I want to kind of help you out or pre-help you out and just ask, are you excluding God's purposes from your future plans? How are you going to find meaning and purpose apart from God, apart from his purposes in your life? Retirement promises us this. It promises us that if you work hard and you save it all up and you stay disciplined and you make wise choices, at some point you get to have all this style of life. Is that just a counterfeit? Are we at the point where our privilege allows us to counterfeit our human understanding of what heaven is supposed to be? Is it an idol that we're serving and working towards? That sounds really like preacherly to start poking holes at that, but I'm poking holes at that in response to the number of articles. I mean, it's hundreds and thousands of people in places where these discussions are happening of how do we find meaning apart from our work. And part of it was your job was associated with your work, and your job had all the meaning, and now you no longer have your job. But we actually have God's plan right here from page 1 to the very last page. I don't know if you've noticed that, but we're on the last page of the Bible here in this sermon. From page 1 to the final page, God's work is included there. God's purpose is included there. He's given us the answer in advance. We don't have to walk into this phase of life with no meaning and purpose. I would point you again back to the triangle. Have you figured out the big question mark in the middle of the triangle for your life? Because you might not be going to jail. I hope you're not going to jail in retirement. But retirement, for some people, they use words like they feel trapped. I hope that's not you. I hope you find what is that middle section. What is your purpose that God's given you? I hope that the years of planning and retirement give you the ability to live out that plan that God has had, that purpose that he's had for your life. I hope that now it's just simply this freeing from the day-to-day grind that allows you to live out that purpose for him. Let me close this in prayer. Lord, as we think about creation, as we think about heaven, and then as we think about the here and now, we realize work is part of all of it. Not just that, your purpose and your plan is part of all of it. You have known the beginning, you have known the end, you know our beginning and our end. All around us are other options, other opportunities, temptations. Escape, be lazy. On the other side, worship your work. Find all of your meaning in your job. And yet, the counterfeit speaks to the fact that there's a real thing here, that you really have work for us from the beginning all the way to the end. So Lord, we just want to hand our work to you, whatever phase of life we're in. We just want to hand our work to you. What is the way that we're bringing blessing to others? We want to hand this to you and just say, Lord, guide us, guide our steps. There's no science to having this stuff figured out. It's the movement of your Spirit in our lives. So lead us, Lord, and we will follow.